So let's have a look at the men's side of things first of all, because yeah, very happy news for British fans. Jack Draper winning his very first ATP Masters 1000 title. It's his third tour title. It's his biggest one yet. He seems to be going up and up in a nice progressive fashion, isn't he, with the sort of level of his titles. And I mean, not to mention just the title, he's now into the top 10 as well, being coming in at number 7 in the rankings. He beat Holger Rune, Chris, one of your favorites in the final, 6-2, 6-2, very dominant in the final. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic from Jack Draper over the course of the week, obviously beating Carlos Alcaraz as well in the semi-finals. I don't know where to start because there's so much to unpick, but I mean, Joe, I'm going to come to you. Long-time British tennis fan, obviously.
Is
How
that because he's older than me, Kim?
high he's
He's
older.
longer, yeah.
He's endured more pain as a British fan.
Yes.
But now that Andy Murray's out of the way, Jack Draper, how excited are you for Jack Draper to kind of arrive in the top 10, arrive on the scene, winning his first Masters title?
I mean, I'm ecstatic for him. He played such good tennis over the last couple of weeks, and I think the conversation around him recently has been, can he kind of crack the top 10? But I think with the way he's been playing at the moment, he's almost changing that conversation because he's playing so well. His forehand is working. Is very destructive on the tennis court when it can be. His serve allows him to kind of get 3 points as well. And he's just very solid as well to kind of stay in the rally. And I think these were some of the key themes across the 2 weeks that led to this win and led to such a dominant win in the final, because there was a worry for me that, this moment might be, get on top of him, or when he was a set up, he might be kind of feeling that pressure, because we are in these moments where this is unknown territory for him. But he just sort of rode that wave and, was very aggressive on the tennis court. And Rune ultimately just could not deal with it.
Yeah, I thought after that semi-final against Carlos Alcaraz, I thought, oh, it's so common for players to kind of have a bit of a slump in the next round, isn't it? And obviously going into the final, he might think, oh, I've beaten Alcaraz, am I now the favourite? But he did so well in almost his best performance he saved for the final. But Chris, what was it that Jack did so well against Rune, who, himself getting to the final was probably his best week in a long time as well. But what was the key difference with Jack getting the win?
I think he really just served so well. I think that was so important. He didn't really give any chances. And quite often, you can get off to a really good start and then you could easily be broken at the start of the second set. It's very easy for matches to get away from you, like his semi-final where we had that very strange bagel after his 6-1 set where it almost went completely flip-flop the other way. He closed the door and he never opened it again. I mean, 10 aces, 0 double faults. He didn't face a break point, and Rune didn't really wasn't really at the races that day. I think that also helped that we're talking about the pressure being on Jack in that environment, but at the same time, it's been so long since Holger has actually, I say so long, it's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but Holger hasn't been in the final for quite some time. And it's been a while since that Masters triumph in Paris, where everyone tipped him to be the next big thing. He was in that conversation with Sinner and with Alcaraz. So there was a lot at stake for him as well. So I think probably the nature of where the pressure lied would probably be more on Holger because of the fact that he hasn't had those results, whereas he's only on an upward trajectory at the moment.
That's true. He doesn't have that sort of pressure of having been at a Masters final level before and won it like Holger. I mean, Jack is now the 5th British man to have won an ATP 1000 event. So Andy Murray, Tim Henman, Greg Rosetsky, and Cam Norrie have all done that. Obviously, Cam Norrie did it a few years ago at Indian Wells. That quite surprising at the time. They all went on to reach top 10. Jack's done that as well. But Joel, out of those other 4 players, is there anyone's career trajectory you think Jack Draper might kind of follow, or what's next for Jack? How high can he go?
Yeah, I certainly don't think that this is going to be his only Masters title, and it's incredible to see the achievements that he has kind of ticked off the list over the last 6 months. Grand Slam semi-final appearance, top 10, first Masters title. I do think these sorts of tournaments are tailor-made for him. There's best of 3 environment across 2 weeks, almost sort of like a 3-set Grand Slam. And I still do think there are questions there with that best of 5 format, but that's why I think this environment and this format works so well for him. In terms of what's next, I think, I think certainly, I do think he's very close. I mean, if you look at the rankings and the number of points, top 5 is not out of the realms of possibility. And I think for him, it's just a case of consistency, making sure he's fit, because I think if he does, the tennis will take care of itself. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at the tour finals at the end of the season.
And I mean, I don't like to make you put numbers on you, on your heads, but how many titles do you think he's picking up this season?
Ooh,
Masters title?
Well, any title.
I think he's going to win 3 more titles this season.
Okay. What about Grand Slams? Is he contending for Grand Slams this season? He's already got a semi-final under his belt. He's proven he can, beat the top names here. Although he hasn't played, Jannik Sinner. There is maybe still an asterisk. He's still got to beat Sinner.
Yeah,
beaten Alcaraz twice in his career, though.
I can see that. I think probably the Alcaraz result last year was a really big turning point for him, where he suddenly thought, you know what, I really can challenge people at the top. And I think the fact that he was going to give up the sport and now he is having this success, I feel like to actually find that motivation when you thought, you know what, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this, and found out you are, I do think he really will have the bit between his teeth. And I think he's only going to go up and up. I don't necessarily think that on these sorts of seasons, you then tend to win a slam that same season. I think if there is a big result like that, it might be the US Open. I think that court does lend itself more to his game potentially. But I mean, the slow court at Indian Wells, I think that's a lot of pressure. That match with Norrie where he lost, I don't think he ever should have lost that match. So it makes me think that maybe, although he's played some great tennis in front of his home crowd in Manchester, he's played some great Davis Cup matches, I do think that is a level of pressure that doesn't necessarily exist in the same way at the Queen's Club. I think Wimbledon is obviously a huge deal. Clay, I'm not so sure about Clay though. I do think he's going to definitely win a slam at some point. I'd say definitely. I'm really confident of that. I mean, Jannik Sinner is still playing. He's only banned for 3 months. But what do you think? Can he win on clay? Can he win on grass?
I think hard would be the most likely surface for a first slam. I mean, it's amazing that we've been having these conversations.
1 week on, and we're like, how many slams?
Talk about getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, American listeners.
Grass, the pressure of the home audience, I think on grass for now might be a bit too much too soon. I think he should just maybe not get too ahead of himself as well, like himself, just focus, week by week on the tour and consistently doing well at these events. I think that's kind of key for now.
Not many points to defend on clay. Joel, how do you think he can do? Do you think he can make some big inroads there? Because he didn't really win many matches at all in the run up to Roland Garros and went out in the first round.
Yeah, I do think clay is probably still the biggest unknown at the moment. But as you say, it's like if he can ride this momentum into the clay season with the lack of points that he's got to defend, it certainly is a big opportunity for him. I do think it's a little bit tougher because I do think, you bring in the South Americans and, the Europeans. I think it's a bit more of a challenge, but I certainly think his game, it just feels so solid all round. I think, he can maybe have a game like an Alexander Zverev on clay that works quite effectively, because I don't care what surfaces if it is. If he's serving the way he is at the moment, particularly with the placement, he's going to be a very tough customer to play against. And if he can bring that aggression, I think more consistently, again, I think it's going to be quite tough for his opponents to deal with, because I go back to that final he had, I think, in Dubai against Rublev, where it felt like Rublev was the aggressor and he was like the counter puncher, looking and waiting for his moments. I sort of think in this final, Rune was kind of waiting for those opportunities as the counter puncher. We saw throughout the 2 weeks that when the rallies were extended, Rune was winning a lot more points. That was where he was making a lot more gains. So Draper taking the initiative, I really liked and really enjoyed to see that in the final. And the fact that any sort of worry or adversity, any sort of love 15, getting cheap points on his first serve, hitting up with kind of first strike tennis, kind of really served him well. And I can see that serving him well in the clay season as well.
Do you think the physicality involved as well? I think that's a big thing that we always had a question mark around, the hip, even as recently as Australia. But he looks like an absolute sort of physical,
Yeah.
unit. I mean, I'm not sure what's the right word to describe it, but he's really has turned around his physicality so much to the point where he is such a better mover, but also that must give you a lot of confidence, I think, that you can keep playing. You don't
Yeah.
have to win the point as quickly because some of the points he's winning are not points that you traditionally would have thought. The winner, the passing shots are Jack Draper points, and now it seems like he's much more.
It's almost Alcaraz like some of the athleticism that I think he has brought to his game. He's sliding around the court. Yeah, I've been so impressed by that since the start of the season. I still think there are question marks there over maybe like longevity and endurance in matches, and I think we're only going to really know that when we get into more and more kind of best of 5 set matches in Grand Slams. But certainly during points, staying in the point, creating these kind of spectacle moments, I certainly think he's up there with Alcaraz.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just one, we've got a couple of other bits to touch upon. Obviously, Holger Rune, beaten finalist. There's a few comments around the fact they were both wearing the same shirt, which is always quite interesting when that happens.
And backwards hat.
And backwards hat. They had a very similar style going on, different coloured shorts, fair enough, but not the easiest, to watch at home on the telly, perhaps, when they kind of got a similar maybe stance and build as well. But there we go. Jack came out on top. But Chris, as a sort of Danish tennis insider, shall we say?
Okay.
Yeah, this was Holger's first final since Brisbane 2024. He hasn't won a title though since I think Munich in 2023. What does he need to do, like, to take the fact that he's got to a final for the first time in a long time, but what does he need to do now to kind of get back up to those winning ways, like you said when he was winning the Paris Masters years ago?
I think the difficulty has always been with Holger is the scheduling side of things and how much he wants it. So I think the scheduling side of things, he plays too frequently, far too many small tournaments. He doesn't necessarily build his schedule like a big time player. He's always talked about improving that, but he hasn't always done it. I mean, he even went to the Golden Swing and then pulled out this time. It didn't necessarily make sense. And then next week he's on court again. So I think that led to some physical issues. And then I think from the tennis side of things, he's always got the game, but he wants it so badly. And I think that's why we saw some tears, because he really did want it. There's been a big time coming. He did think he got to the very top. I think a lot of people thought he would do something really big. But I think the fact that he has got such a big game, the fact that he has had so many big wins and triumphs at a young age means that this is a positive step on the way back to potentially getting back on track. And I hope that the clay court season, because I think that is his best surface, that he can do some real damage, because he did push Sinner more than anyone in Australia. I think we shouldn't forget that. Despite not necessarily making a final, he has been making inroads against some of the top players in the world. And this is testament to the fact that I do think he's playing much better tennis again.
And Joel, on Carlos Alcaraz, he had that very topsy-turvy match with Draper in the semi-finals. He did bagel Draper in that second set, but ultimately came out, the loser over the 3 sets. What do you think he needs to do? I mean, he'll be disappointed with that result. I'm sure he didn't plan to lose to Jack Draper in the semis, but there was an interesting quote after the match about the fact that he was very much focused on what Draper was doing in his game rather than himself. So what do you think Alcaraz is going to take from that match, kind of going into Miami and beyond?
I mean, focus on your game. Don't focus on anyone else's. I think that's quite telling in terms of how much of a threat he now sees Jack Draper. It feels like the gap between them, a few seasons ago was quite large, but actually it's shrinking more and more now to a point that he's on Alcaraz's periphery. He's going to be on Sinner's periphery, I think, as well. And for Alcaraz, I think this was he talked about this tournament and his prep for that match in terms of not having the greatest warm up, struggling with his timing, and I think he'll feel a little bit more at home in Miami. But certainly he needs to focus on his game, because I think he should be doing better than. And as hard as it is to say, I think he should be doing better than kind of a semi-final appearance there. I think he should be looking at the final, possibly even to win that, given how the draw was kind of unfolding around him. But yeah, it's not all terrible, but I certainly think there's room for improvement.
And there was that kind of matter in their match of the VAR. Jack Draper successfully challenging, asking for the VAR to get himself the point awarded. Liani in the chair, agreed that Alcaraz wouldn't have been impacted by his not up call. So, Draper should have won the point. But commentators, a lot of people on social media, everyone watching at home kind of thought, well, actually, no, Alcaraz was hindered. Alcaraz seemed to accept it, though. Draper won the point. They moved on. But what were your personal thoughts about what went down on that VAR moment?
I mean,
Chris, you're nodding along.
I
you
know.
seem like you've got an opinion on this.
I have an opinion on lots of things, Kim, and VAR is one of the things I have strongest opinions on because you shouldn't need to use it. And if you do use it, it should clear things up very quickly. So the fact that there were two different reviews that had to happen in order for a decision to be made that I don't necessarily think was the right decision is not good. Liani is not the most serious of umpires, I have to say. I'm not his biggest fan when it comes to the style of umpiring where he's almost on stage like an actor also on stage on the court. I think he likes to take up quite a lot of space, and I'm not sure that anyone or many other umpires would think that this would be not up, because even watching from behind and on TV, it was quite clearly that Jack Draper got there. So that obviously impacts the match. I do not enjoy when the match is interrupted because of such an obvious mistake from an umpire. There were 4 minutes roughly that this caused of disruption. And then that second review, I actually think that Alcaraz took it very well, but I do think it could have actually caused a bit of a shift in the momentum there because a break did happen. It was at a crucial moment. And I do think that if someone is calling something out, saying it's not up, that actually could affect whether you make your next shot or not. So I don't think the rules were followed. And I think that a lot of the commentators agree with that. But it is just such a shame because you just want to watch a great tennis match. It was a great point. And then we're back in, the VAR fail section of the podcast, which seems to be weekly at this point.
I was thinking about that, about the final. I was settling down, excited for the tennis to unfold. And then, Kim, as you said, I just saw them in matching kits, basically. And I was sort of worried if I was going to be able to tell apart Draper and Rune. Before we move on, I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, do you think there should be a rule in place for big matches like this where we shouldn't have two players in effectively the same outfits? Yes, I know they had different color shoes on, and one's a lefty and one's a righty, but do you think they should be allowed to play in the same tops and have the same look?
Maybe we need VAR to find out which one hit the ball or which one didn't.
Yeah, I mean, ideally they'd be in different colours. I think it's awkward when they're both sponsored by the same.
Do you think it should be enforced though?
Manufacturer. I suppose like a home and away kit for footballers. Yeah, they have it there, don't they?
I mean,
so
it's a double sales platform for Nike in that respect. So
yeah,
whoever you're supporting,
you'll
be buying a Nike outfit. So I think it happens quite a lot. I mean, everyone wears white at Wimbledon, and we can still tell people apart.
True.
So that's what I would say is that if we pretend it's Wimbledon, we can all do it.
And last, before we go on to look at the WTA side of things, not great tournament for Zverev, Casper Ruud, Novak Djokovic. Who do you think's got the most work to do as we go into Miami starting this week?
Oh, that's it. I mean, Zverev has got to pick up something from somewhere. I think that's definitely important because I think at this stage his confidence will be dropping significantly. We talked about it last week, but Djokovic is also, he's struggling for any kind of form. So, I mean, it's a very strange one looking at this because, I mean, neither of those players would you necessarily think at this stage would have lost as many matches as they have this year, given some of the results they've had earlier in the season. So probably both of those. Joel, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Zverev, I want the clay season to begin, as quick as possible because it's just not had a good time of it lately. And I think you'll find, the opportunity to reset, move surfaces. I think that will be, good for him. I would say Djokovic more so than Zverev for me personally has work to do because he's just not been able to pick up any momentum, since having that injury, having that time off after the Australian Open.
Even with Murray, Joel.
And yeah, exactly. And, looking at his draw, which we'll get onto in the second half for Miami, he could face Medjedovic in the second round. And that is not an easy, all Serbian affair. That is not an easy tie first up.